So this session, I'm really looking forward to it. It's called Climate Rebellion. How do we get system change? We've got a really fantastic panel of speakers. And so they're going to be we've got 3 speakers, and then we'll have some time for discussion, and then I'll bring them back at the end. So first off, we have, so we have Patrick Wakefield. He is a school striker. So Patrick.
Listen to what I have to say first, like you might disagree with it all. Hi, I'm Patrick Wakefield, and I'm just one of the millions of school students worldwide who have been striking in order to pretty much just save the planet, really. Our actions have been an act of defiance. Defiance in the face of a system that is systematically stealing our futures. And as it stands, my generation has no future. Not only are we going to go into I've lost where I am. Not only do we face an insecure job market, but rife with 0-hour contracts, and face a public sector decimated by 10 years of brutal austerity, but we will also have to deal with the dramatic impacts of climate change. Climate breakdown will bring around food shortages, the lack of resources, and will displace millions. And we know that under our current system, this burden will be placed on us, the working class, minority groups, refugees and migrants, and people in the global south. For years, the mainstream arguments about climate change have dominated. They told us that that climate change was man-made, and it was to do with all of us. It was all of our actions put together that caused it. It was us driving places. It was us not recycling that caused this. But this is a lie. It was not you and it was not me who caused this crisis. It was those at the top, the bosses, the billionaires, the people who control the means of production, who have exploited this planet and the people for their own monetary gain. And it is that group of people's actions who will have such dramatic ramifications in all of our lives, yet they will never experience or even see how these how they affect ordinary everyday people. That is why on the 15th of February, 15th of March, 12th of April, 24th of May and the 21st of June, thousands of students all across the UK refused to turn up to school or left their lessons in school as an act of rebellion from this system. Despite warning from parents and disciplinary staff at school, we stood together in solidarity, ready to fight for a change and to take control out of those billionaires, those bosses, those people exploiting the planet, and put it into ours. And although the school strikes have been absolutely fantastic and it's been an amazing display of consciousness in a time of extremely low levels of strike and political action, we cannot win our fight alone. Our actions have been amazing for raising students' political understanding and confidence, and along with Extinction Rebellion, we have brought climate change to the third most pressing issue among the general public. But left on our own, this could very mean that all we can achieve. There is no obligation for the government to listen to our demands. There is no economic disruption, and we try and stay away from the civil disruption that Extinction Rebellion take part of, in case we alienate some of the less confident people or parents who are supportive. This is why that we are trying to currently build links with workers' movements. Because we understand that it is those who have a central role in production of wealth in this country who have the greatest factor for change. Taking part in political action has raised the consciousness of millions of students, and now we must work to raise the consciousness of workers, to show them the power that we all have. And workers and students must stand together to once again become the driving factors for change in our society. That's why we're calling for a strike on the 20th of September, so that we can stand together and make a difference. The title of this discussion is How Can We Get System Change? And I think that we should be clear about the role that working class people will play. Only the proletariat has the social power to completely stop production, the power to completely devastate those at the top, and to stop that exploitation. We must be clear when addressing workers that we have the same enemies. As environmental activists, the same bosses who are cutting wages are polluting the air. The same bosses who stop workers organising are the same ones who are polluting the planet. And it is the same bosses that workers have fought in the past that we will fight together and win. So I want to talk, where can we go from where we are now? We have mass student consciousness and a student body who are willing to take action despite many punishments or anything like that. And I think what we need to work to is like building the workers' movement, like I said. But this is obviously a very daunting task. We are obviously in the midst of very low levels of workers' consciousness. There are low levels of strikes across the country, and we're actually facing anti-trade union laws which hold us back so much that the fact it is illegal to strike for wider political issues. They've made it illegal for you to take strike on government issues. You can only have a dispute directly with your employer. So it's been extremely hard for us to build this movement and make the links with trade unionism and youth strikers. So what we want to do is create solidarity. So we know that they must be separate. So what we're trying to build for is, if we move to tell the strikers to strike on the 20th of September, if they have an issue over pay, over pensions, over anything like that, over their political issues with their employer, we will stand in solidarity with them, because we understand that we must make these links, and we ask that they then put it on this date to stand in solidarity with us, to show that we were actually united in our causes, even though they're separate. Sorry, I've kind of waffled on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was absolutely amazing. I'm sure we all can agree. So next I want to invite Polly Hallam to speak. She's also a school striker and an Extinction Rebellion activist, so give it up for Polly.
Thank you. So, hi, I'm Polly. Obviously, I'm a youth striker as well as a supporter of Extinction Rebellion. I only got asked to do this talk, 2 hours ago? So, I'll just give you a brief overview of how we in Extinction Rebellion think that we can get system change, and how we approach this issue, and how we're trying to solve climate and ecological breakdown, because we need to think it through. It's a big thing to do. It needs some planning and some thinking through. So firstly, this is the part of the movement that I think more people will be aware of, because we've tried really hard to put it to the forefront and make it really clear for everyone, so it's accessible to know what our demands are. So these are our 3 demands. Number 1, to tell the truth. So I'm sure you all saw in Rebellion Week that we had the big pink boat with Tell the Truth. And it's really important that the government and the media need to be transparent about the horrific scale of the climate crisis we face. So I know that even a year ago, I've always been passionate about climate change. I've always known that we need some big change, and we need to do more than we've ever been doing before. It needs to be radical. But I didn't realize, even the most passionate people about climate change had no idea of the scale of the crisis that we face. We had no idea of the time limits and all the repercussions and how fast they were going to come on, and how radical our change needs to be. So telling the truth, having the media tell the truth, report on climate change and be truthful about this crisis is just the most important thing I think that we need to have in order to tackle this, because I think if everyone realized the full extent of the crisis, we'd have so many more people helping us to solve it. So yeah, that's our first demand, and it's really important. The second demand is act now. Our government must act immediately to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. So guys, that's like 6 years. It's urgent. This is really important, this date that we have it really clearly set out as part of our strategy. So this is, as opposed to at the moment, Britain's current target is 2050. So yeah, we need to bring this forward backward 25 years. The third one, which is also really important, I think is the most important of our three demands, and the thing that is going to be the turning point in how we get system change and how we combat this crisis, is beyond politics. So the government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. Party politics has failed to solve this crisis. We now need something new. We need something different. So I'm just going to read, in case you're not that clued up on like what a citizens' assembly is, I'm just going to read from the XR website how they describe it and all the different important like factors of it. So a citizens' assembly brings people together to learn, deliberate, and make recommendations on an issue of public concern. Similar to jury service, members are randomly selected from the population by a process called sortition. Quotas are used to ensure that the assembly is representative in terms of key characteristics such as gender, age, ethnicity, education level, and geography. Assembly members learn about critical thinking before they hear balanced information from experts and stakeholders. The members spend time deliberating in small facilitated groups then they draft and vote on recommendations. Citizens' assemblies are conducted by non-partisan organisations under independent oversight. They're transparent, inclusive, and effective. So yeah, this is really important that we have this citizens' assembly, because in Extinction Rebellion, we're not trying to push specific policies on how we need to combat the climate crisis. We're not trying to say we need to do this specific thing. We're not trying to push this agenda. We want to hear what the people have to say, and we know that that's the most powerful way to get it across in a citizens' assembly. So yeah, these demands, they're quite radical, they're quite different to what a lot of other organisations are saying we need to do. Our strategy, yeah, it's different. So how are we going to achieve this? Well, Extinction Rebellion follows a strategy of non-violent civil disobedience and direct action with the aim of disrupting everyday life to force the government to take radical action. Which we've already partly done with the actions in London in Rebellion Week, which was really important. We've already got a climate emergency declared and that kind of thing. So we know that this can work. So yeah, that's our strategy. And Extinction Rebellion and the Youth Strikers are some of the only movements at the moment that are pushing for a complete change in how we approach and save ourselves from ecological breakdown. We all know that we need a big change. We need to change how society works, and this is what we want to do. Another important thing about how we in Extinction Rebellion want to create system change is how the organisation is deliberately curated for the maximum impact and urgency. One example of this would be the decision to adopt a totally non-violent strategy. So according to research on conflicts between non-state and state actors around the world between 1900 and 2006, it was found that 53% of non-violent campaigns were successful, as opposed to 26% of campaigns that used violence. Moreover, of the violent campaigns, 95% had descended into dictatorship or totalitarian rule within 5 years. So this is just to demonstrate how one thing that I really love about Extinction Rebellion is how we use the research, and it's all thought through, because we don't have any time for messing around anymore. Everything that we do needs to be curated to have the maximum impact and to get the most people on board. And I think that's really important, and that's what's perhaps different about Extinction Rebellion compared to other movements, that it's all completely curated. So as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this movement, and I really think that it is one of the most hopeful movements around, along with the youth strikes, so we can achieve system change and so we can save ourselves from this crisis. And what we need is 3.5% of the population mobilized to achieve this. So I hope that you can understand my enthusiasm for this and our strategy of how we can get system change, and that you'll join us in fighting for climate justice.
Thank you so much. I think we're all incredibly inspired by what you had to say. So lastly, I'd like to invite Lois Nielsen to speak. He is one of the organisers of Marxism Festival. Thank you.
Well, look, I'd like to think that most people who come to Marxism Festival are pretty optimistic people. Even the most optimistic of us, though, you wouldn't blame us for being a bit worried with the news that comes out about the climate and the state of our environment. Even the most optimistic people must find it sometimes quite hard to be hopeful about the future of the planet. It's now almost a daily news item, isn't it, that stresses the dangers facing our planet. There's obviously the overarching headline that came out earlier this year from the IPCC report about 12 years left to save the planet. But to be honest, there's a million other headlines which should have us very worried. You know, the fact that we're now entering into the 6th mass extinction, threatening huge amounts of species and plant life. The last mass extinction was when the dinosaurs were extinct. It gives you a scale of the crisis facing us. You think about the extreme weather we've seen recently, the cyclones in Mozambique, the polar vortex in the US, the fact that I think June this year was labelled as the hottest month in history since records began on the planet. And it's because of that, really, that I want to say a big thank you to people like Patrick and Polly and the school strikers and Extinction Rebellion for giving us hope again. The action taken by the students and by Extinction Rebellion has given us a reason to be hopeful, and it's really created a mood where it now feels like everything's possible again. It feels like everything's changed. The debate on the climate has shifted. You think about the debates for the Democratic Party that's going on in the US at the moment. In the first debate to be the candidate for the Democrats, they already spent more time discussing the climate than they did in the whole of the debates in 2016. It's now something that's discussed on the radio. Radio 4 discuss it, don't they? The Today programme. Everyone is talking about this now, in the media, the workplaces, schools, and so on. And it's a wonderful example, I think, about how a national or an international debate can be changed not by people in Parliament, not by the press, but by people taking action on the streets, by students in Melbourne, in Brussels, in London. It has changed the debate around the issue, and like I said, it now feels like everything is possible again, and especially in Britain, it's especially important that it's happened. The Brexit paralysis has been shattered by the climate stuff that has erupted. My favourite sign from the protests is of the young woman on the protest holding up a sign saying 2 years messing around about Brexit while the planet burns. I think that sums it up perfectly. And I guess the discussion today really is about how do we deepen that movement. It's been a fantastic start. How do we deepen it? How do we bring it into the labour movement, the trade union movement, and so on? And obviously within that, there's a lot of big questions that come out. There's a lot of questions that have been raised. I haven't got time to touch on all of them, but people should raise them in the discussion. You know, questions about direct action and civil disobedience and non-violence. Questions about the role of the police. Questions about the role of trade unions. All of these kind of things. One thing I do want to touch on, though, because I haven't got time to cover them all, one thing I do want to touch on is to state that climate change does not impact everyone equally. It is the poorest people in society who suffer the most from climate change. Think about the cyclones we saw in Mozambique a month or so ago. The devastation of homes, the lives lost, and so on. The contribution of African nations like Mozambique to carbon emissions is negligible. It's negligible compared to some other countries. So it's true to say that the biggest share of carbon emissions lies with the global north. There's that figure, isn't there? That 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions, all global emissions historically. And all of those companies, or the vast majority, are based in the global north. This is true. But it's also important to point out what Patrick said. It's the companies who are responsible. It's not everyone in the global north. Class has an impact on climate change. The poorest people in the global north will also suffer the most. Think about Hurricane Katrina. The richest economy in the world, it was the poorest and the black community that were left in Katrina to drown or to at their homes facing damage and so on. Think about the polar vortex or the cold weather that hits Britain and hit the one that hit America. It's the pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes. It's the poor people who can't have insulated homes or, pay the heating bill. It's those who will be affected most. Think about the coastal communities of Britain. The neglected, dilapidated coastal communities, they're the ones that will suffer the most. It was the rich who can, fantasise about space travel to different planets or moving to go and live in the Andes. They will not be affected. It's working class people across the world who will bear the brunt of it. And it's because of that, really, that any solution to the climate crisis has to recognise that because it's working class people who will suffer the most, actually working class people have the most to gain from a solution to climate change. They have the most to gain from stopping the impending disaster. And that's why there's a buzzword, isn't there, around the climate movement called a just transition. People talk about this. It can sound like a bit of a fluffy word, talking about a just transition to a different kind of society. To be honest, though, it's not. It's about saying that ordinary people have to be part of the solution to the climate crisis. And that's why I do think that the call for a general strike on the 20th of September is so important. It's a call to the working class movement, a call to the trade union movement to join the fight. And you see, sometimes there's a caricature, isn't there, of the left? There's a caricature that in social movements and in protests and so on, that we're always the ones standing on the side saying this is great, but what you really need is a strike. General strike now. It's a bit of a caricature of a left-wing position. Now the call hasn't come from us. It's come from the movement. It's come from the students. This is a fantastic development. And you see, it shows about how quickly the debate has changed. If you had told me, when we started planning Marxism Festival in January, if you had told me that we were going to have sessions discussing a general strike for climate, I would have laughed you out of the room, to be honest. If you had said that we would have had a genuine discussion about how trade unionists can strike for the climate, no one would have thought that was possible. Now it does seem possible. And so that date is out there, the 20th of September. I think it's worth us thinking a bit what it's going to look like. Because there's a big call now, it's an international call, and I think we have to think what we can do in Britain. I think one thing is certain, is that I hate to disappoint anyone, I do not think the Trade Union Congress are going to ballot for a general strike of their members for the first time since 1926. I'd love that to happen. I think that's quite unlikely. I think it's also quite unlikely that the Trade Union Congress are going to lead strikes that break the anti-trade union laws. Again, I'd like them to do that. I think that's quite unlikely. To be honest, though, I think if our starting point is about the anti-union laws or about the TUC, to be honest, I think we've missed the point a bit. I think we're starting things the wrong way round. The slogan of XR was no more business as usual. I think that has to apply to us as well, not just to the bosses. It has to apply to how we organise. And therefore, I think there's two things we have to do for the 20th of September. The first thing is we have to popularise the idea that as many branches, unions and so on as possible support the call for some kind of action or some kind of strike. There's a motion going to the TUC for a 30-minute work stoppage. We want to get as many branches and union districts and regions and whatever passing motions saying that we support the strike and we support the call for it. And that's important. To be honest, though, the thing that will really shift it, the thing that will really shift the mood around the 20th of September is if, in the next few weeks, we have 15, 20, 30 workplaces who say we are going to do something on the 20th of September. We're not just going to pass a motion, who say we are actually going to do something. Maybe we're not going to walk out for the whole day. Maybe we're going to do something at lunchtime and hope it spills over. But we need to come out, I think, of Marxism with 10 or 15 workplaces who say that something is possible on the day. And we need to popularise that. We need to get a feeling that stuff is going to happen in the workplaces. And I think that's the biggest, most important task, that if I was a trade unionist now organising for the strike, that's what I'd be thinking. What is going to happen in my workplace in that day? And our biggest enemy is to be conservative around this. I'm all in favour of selfies. I love a good selfie, the selfie solidarity signs. If we start with that, though, we are limiting the horizons about what's possible. We really are. We have to start on a much bigger stage. So I think this meeting should be a bit of a council of war about how we achieve that, about how we get to that situation. And I think we have to see it as a start, the start of a process. I'd love it if hundreds of thousands of people walk out on the 20th of September. To be honest, though, even if it's only a few hundred, that few hundred can win the idea with the hundreds of thousands. If a few hundred walk out, it might not win a general strike, but it can popularise the idea about it. And why don't we then call another one for October and November? The students go monthly, we should have monthly workplace ones. We have to see it as the beginning of trying to win our side and win a process and win an argument in the union movement. I think it's a massive opportunity to put socialist and class politics at the heart of this. And within it all, I think there's a big, big question that needs answering. And that question really is, why is nothing being done? That's what the XR First Demand is about. At least acknowledge that there's a climate emergency. You know, we acknowledge it and then nothing is being done about it. Every few years, the politicians in suits get together, they have their big summits, and they do nothing. Even the groundbreaking one, where they stood on the table celebrating at Paris, where apparently they'd achieved this great deal, it did nothing to force people to stick to it. And we have to ask the question of why that is. We have to ask that question. And it's because they sit atop a system which... they sit atop a system which Marx identified as having at the heart of it a drive for accumulation's sake. In other words, a system that builds wealth just to make more money. There's no rationale, there's no logic. It's a system where, at its heart, it has an insanity which says that when the polar ice caps in the Arctic are melting, that's an opportunity to drill for more oil. It's not a warning sign, it's a business opportunity. It's a way to send more tankers across the straits. And we have to point to that system, and we have to say that if we want to build a different one, if we want to build a sustainable world, it's not just about limiting the power of those companies. It's not just about giving them an energy mix where they have a bit of renewable and a bit of fossil fuels. It's about smashing those 100 companies. It's about stopping them operating. And if we want to build that kind of system, I think it's about building on the fantastic work of the students, the fantastic work of XR, but it means getting it out there into every workplace to say that the 20th of September is going to be a climate strike and we're going to build for more for the future. Thank you.
Right, well, as somebody in their 60s, I'd like to thank the speakers, and you're basically the adults in the room in this situation. And it really makes me feel like, you know, we have a future here. And what scares me a lot, talking to people that aren't so clued in, is that they really believe there's got to be a technological solution to climate change. And we haven't really got to worry because, you know, the scientists will fix it. And what I noticed during the XR protests in London, which I think were fantastic, is there's a strong tendency for the people in the establishment to kind of patronise the young people that get called into TV studios, pat you on the head, say, oh, isn't it great, you're young and enthusiastic, but kind of, you know, you'll get real and you'll grow out of it and stuff. And I would like to highlight one of the things I think is an issue is the role of the police, because, yeah, it's great, the police were very cooperative and kind and nice and coordinating with the young people on the streets, but another meeting this weekend, we're looking at what happened to Blair Peach during the Southall protest when we stood up against the Nazis, who was killed by the police. And I wonder, you know, as soon as the XR protests get a bit bigger, they get more multicultural, they get more black faces, the police might well change. And I think we need to be really careful as seeing them as the friends of the movement, because they're not effectively, they're agents of the state. I know individually they might agree with you, but in their uniform, that's a whole different matter. And just yesterday, to make another link to the refugees crisis, I saw a really heartbreaking film over in the Culture Tent where these awful sort of floating death traps of African refugees were coming across, and this Dutch guy was trying to rescue them, and he was in tears at just having fished out 4 dead bodies from the sea, and saying that these are climate refugees, and this is going to get bigger and bigger, and the kind of fascist mentality of some of our governments is going to be let them drown, and that's already happening. So these things are all linked, and I think it's great that, you know, that XR is linking them, and I think we need to make those links all the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I must apologise, I've never done a meeting as big as this before, so I got completely overwhelmed with all the hands. So I'll take Emma. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was an absolutely brilliant platform, and it's so inspiring to get to hear, especially from the students in XR who've just been leading on this question. I'm a teacher in Barking and Dagenham, a primary school teacher, and I really think that it's important that when we talk about climate, and this is something that Lois really was bringing out, climate is a class issue. It's something which we will not have a working class in 20, 30 years if we don't actually solve this question. And when we talk about class as well, we're talking about clearly the majority of people. I also think that what we need to talk about is we talk a bit about moving beyond politics. I think what we need to say is we're moving beyond the parliamentary politics, the politics of the capitalist system that is constantly selling us out. But at the same time, I think we do have to say we need organization, and we do need political organization and leadership. And that means looking to the streets and looking to the workplaces and looking to the places where we have the potential to collectively organize for direct democracy. And when we talk about direct democracy, we mean the masses involved in making the choices in our world. And that's not just individuals. And I think we have to start thinking in that way. And the 20th of September really has to be our starting point. And I think Lois is also absolutely right to say that we have to think big on this. My workplace, we've done the solidarity selfie. The head teacher led the solidarity selfie. We're doing the off-topic teaching day. I'm a primary school teacher. We're doing the protest in the schoolyard. And really, it gets to the point, though, where you can't just keep doing solidarity selfies anymore. And even to the head teachers, I think, right, I'm with my head teacher right now. Surely we need to be 2 or 3 steps beyond our head teachers and pushing them. So that's why we're absolutely going to be talking about, at the very minimum, getting a lunchtime walkout, if not even starting to talk about if the kids are out, why aren't we out on the streets with them? I have also heard examples of primary schools closer to central London where they have they actually have taken the kids on the demonstrations. Lewis also once talked about the kids writing letters giving their teachers permission to take the day off work. I think that's the kind of, that's the direction that we have to be going, and we have to be setting our sights really big and saying anything is possible right now. The kids are doing it, we've got to be there with them.
Hi, yeah, I'm the Communities Outreach Coordinator for York XR and a member of the SWP. In a meeting yesterday on the metabolic rift, the issue of the disappearance of birdsong was raised. When we occupied Marble Arch at Easter, birdsong was heard for the first time in decades. Since the Easter Rebellion, our XR group in York has had a deliberate policy of building the local group and reaching out to the wider community. We had an event called Demand a Future at the library. We invited groups to run stalls, so we had faith groups, local environmental projects, stand-up Up to Racism, Friend of the Earth and others. The speakers for the People's Assembly part of the event, which had over 300 people at it, included Stand Up to Racism, a school striker, an environmental academic and a UCU rep to talk about the importance of trade unions. XR York are determined to hold the council to account. Unlike other pressure groups that may send speakers to talk to council meetings if they don't act, XR has every intention of occupying such meetings and escalating action against decisions which go against the state of the climate emergency declaration. People going to rise up like water, going to shut this system down was one of the songs of the rebellion. Some parts of the movement have tried to change the lyrics to turn this system round. In York, we're determined that it's still going to be shut it down. XR recognise every day without action is a day where the 11 or fewer years we have to left tick down. The school strikers say the same. What's the point of educating us for a future we won't have unless we fight for it? At Unison conference, saying there was no point in passing motion after motion about how terrible the world is without actually doing anything really resonated, as did pointing out that climate activists don't worry about legal jeopardy. This urgency needs to be reflected in organising for September the 20th, because if workers don't become involved directly, then the climate action is not going to succeed. There have already been indications that the police will step up their action against activists in the next rebellion. Many people have seen footage of the French police walking around climate activists sitting in the road, spraying tear gas directly in their faces. It's also hard to block roads near oil rigs, but as Ian Angus pointed out, the workers can shut off the pipes. There are already moves in schools to deflect student anger and any potential action by teachers. The Government Department for Digital Media and Culture have launched an education pack specifically aimed at September the 20th. It talks about harnessing people's energy to make impactful change by talking to business and future policy leaders. As a school worker, XR activist and a member of the SWP, I see it as my responsibility not to dampen anger, but to garner the energy to get the most action we can to reflect the urgent need to stop the 6th mass extinction.
Thank you. Now I'll take yourself, thank you, and then I'll take you after, okay?
Thank you. My name is Suzanne Jeffrey, and I'm a chair of Campaign Against Climate Change, and I just wanted to kind of embrace the enthusiasm that there is here for the 20th of September and the enthusiasm that's been across Marxism for that date. I think it's really, really important that we see the 20th of September and walking onto the stage of climate action, working class people walking onto the stage of climate action in an organised way as the beginning of a process and not the end of a process. The 20th of September has to be seen as the beginning. And that's because if we are to deliver the kind of climate action that we need, there is no question about it, but there has to be a massive shift in power, away from the minority, away from the 1%, as we called it in the Occupy movement, to the majority, to the 99%. Unless that shift of power takes place, unless progressive governments are ushered in which deliver for the 99%, unless we wrest control of the means of our social production from the 1%, we will not be able to deliver the climate action that we need to resolve this climate crisis. So we have to see what we do on the 20th as part of that process. I want to talk a little bit about the UCU motion that is going to TUC conference. That's a motion that UCU NEC passed unanimously, and I want to thank our comrades and colleagues and friends in UCU for passing that motion. The motion will go to TUC Congress a couple of weeks before the 20th of September, and it will call on the TUC to stand in solidarity with the school students and to call a 30-minute workplace day of action in solidarity on the 20th with school students. Now that's an incredibly important motion, and let's let those people off the hook. I don't think it's the right thing to do to think in terms of the TUC that these people will not do anything. We just let these people off the hook. They have a responsibility. The call has gone out to them as well. We want to hear what they are going to say. Are you going to support that call? Are we going to stand in solidarity with the school students, or are you going to ignore it? And that's incredibly important. I think we should also see the passing of that motion as historic, but let's think about the context in which it happens. Those TUC delegates should know that as they're listening to that motion debated up and down the country on not just hundreds of workplaces, but hundreds of thousands of workplaces that are organising as best they can to stand in solidarity with school students on that day. Of course we want the maximum action, wherever we can deliver the maximum action. I'm just thinking though, if I was to ask people to put their hands up here of who has already done a workplace trade union solidarity in their workplace, I'm not sure that I would see a sea of hands. So we do have to think actually about our own workplaces and delivering the maximum action that we can in our own workplaces. Let's think about that motion being passed in the context of hundreds of thousands of workplaces planning to deliver the maximum action that they can. If that motion is passed in that context, if in every town and city there is already mapped out what will happen in workplaces across that town and city, then the context of winning that motion is one where we can elevate that call for 30-minute stoppage into something much greater, much more significant and much deeper. And if the motion is lost, we will know that we stand alongside everybody who has fought to deliver that motion, and we will know that those people who have failed to support the motion have failed not only the climate movement but the working class, and that will mean that we redouble our efforts to deliver on that day. It's absolutely important that we see this as part of a crucial day of action, and that we fight to deliver in every workplace the maximum solidarity that we can, and the place should be abuzz with activity as the beginning of a working class fight for the climate change, for the action against climate change that we need from the 20th of September onwards.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a teacher and a climate activist in Victoria, Canada, and I actually have been a socialist and an activist for a long time, but really wasn't paying a lot of attention to the climate issue until the IPCC report came out last November. And it was a real shake-up, and students started striking where we are. I think the very first one was December, but the first one with some sizable numbers was in March, and we had 2,000 people out in March. And it's funny because when I saw those 2,000 people, we're in a capital city, so it was the lawn of the legislature, I just kind of thought, we need a global general strike. Like, it's the size of the problem, that's the size of the response. And it was funny because I went home later that day and there it popped up on my Facebook feed, Global General Strike, September. That was the September 27th date. Anyway, that was the moment of like, well, yeah, we have to get acting on making this happen, because you don't walk into your union and call for a strike action without having done any of the background work. So we actually had our provincial general meeting the next day. We handed out flyers on the 15th and recruited some students, and they spoke to the meeting. I've started networking with a group of other teachers. My provincial union's 40,000 people. And we actually tried already to bring a motion to go out on the 20th. It failed, however. We got it there. We got the discussion started. And kind of like the comments here, the next question was, well, then what can we do? What's possible? So my local, which is about 2,000 people, we're actually looking at the whole week as potential action days, the 20th to the 27th. We have a professional day in there. So we have called a rally and teach-in. Schools are closed, but teachers are expected to be at their school, so instead we're going to bring them back to the legislature. Students will be joining us there, and we're going to talk about climate. So I think this is, like all these ideas, it's so true. This is step one, and step two will be out with you. I kind of have a concrete question to everybody in the group too. Is one thing that would be really helpful is more information about what everybody's doing and where people have motions that have been successful. And I found it extremely difficult to find information. I know that there were 2 unions in Belgium that went out in solidarity on the March day. Those are the only actual strikes I'm aware of that have taken place to date. I'm aware the Massachusetts teachers have have a motion that's going to the NEA in the US, but it's really hard to find these little ones and twos, and to be honest, I mean, it's helpful for us if nobody in Canada is doing something, even if someone in, you know, any other country is doing something, when we're standing there on the shop floor saying we should be doing this because look, you know, they're doing it and they're doing it and they're doing it. Doesn't matter what country it's in, that's going to help us build a movement, because I think it's totally true that if we get to that critical mass, suddenly we'll all be doing it, and that's the place we need to get to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So it's just the comrades here. If you maybe pass the mic down, might be easier. Thank you. And then.
Thanks, Mike from Manchester. I'm a Unison rep, and I'm also on the service group executive in Unison for water, environment and transport workers, although anything I say is in a personal capacity, as it may not be entirely compliant with the union's rule book. But anyway, leaving that aside, I just wanted to talk about how we get the thing on the 20th that all three speakers have talked about. How do we pull it off, if you like? How do we create the mood in our workplace to do something as maximum as we can get on the 20th of September? I think the first thing we have to do is talk to people around us and enthuse people about it. Hopefully by now you've already spoken to people you work with about how brilliant it was when you went on the last school student strike in your lunch break or something, or just talk generally about them. But you need to enthuse some people around you. And that also applies to branch officers. You need to find a branch officer or two. I mean, I'm branch officer, so I've talked to 2 or 3 of the others. You need to enthuse them as well. But at this point, you need to avoid completely going down the path of making a firm decision, if you like, on a strike. You need to talk about how we need to do this, how there must be a strike, but you need to sidestep and gently dissuade people from making a decision. To put it bluntly, the last thing you want is for some branch officer to say, I know, I'll ring the Northwest region of Unison and get some advice on this. That will kill it stone dead. At our union meeting, we didn't vote on whether we were going to call for a strike. We just agreed that that would be a good thing and we'd leave the thing open. We're having a workplace meeting, a lunchtime, basically a seminar, workshop. We're getting a speaker from XR. We're getting a speaker, just talked to the people from Preston New Road, the anti-fracking occupation that's going on for a long time now. You know, just create something that can enthuse a bunch of people and leave it open, but aim for the highest possible. Maybe in some places a workplace meeting at lunchtime isn't possible. A petition would work based on the model motion that's been circulating. Do a petition. If 20 or 30 people sign a petition that mentions taking action on the day, then it's quite likely that some of them will want to do something on the day. So we've got to be a bit creative. We've got to not avoid the question of the strike, because that's what we want, but we have definitely got to avoid making firm decisions that may or may not be compliant with rule books and the laws. We've just got to leave it open, enthuse people, and in some workplaces, certainly where I work, but I won't mention that in case of bringing into disrepute and all that nonsense. But in some workplaces, it will work to approach the employer and to say, look, a lot of us want to do this on today. Is that okay? And just to sort of get the nod that there isn't going to be any mass victimisation. That wouldn't work everywhere, but we should keep an open mind that that could also work. But the main thing is start enthusing people on Monday about it.
Hey.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I totally forgot, we have in the north the Northern Rebellion at the end of August as well, organised by Extinction Rebellion from the 30th of August for several days, so people can plug into that and use it as part of building up the wave of enthusiasm.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really sorry, we've only got time for one more.
Okay, look, I just wanted to say that I don't think it's just the people here at Marxism who are enthused about or thinking about the strike. I'm sure on your way into work, to the meeting this morning, you all picked up a copy of the Financial Times or looked to their website, because the Financial Times this morning has an article online about the climate strike, saying, you know, what a workplace is going to do. And one of the interesting things about that article is that the journalist highlights a little bit of a contradiction. which is that lots and lots of workplaces have been going on about how something's got to be done about climate change and how they want their workers to be more green and to manage their things. And actually, he then writes to a whole number of workplaces and says, what will you do if your workers go on strike? And interestingly, not all of them say they're not going to do anything. Interestingly, one of the people, lots of the companies ignore them, all the big fossil fuel companies, except for Shell, who says we support people taking action on climate change. Now, it's interesting, bear with me, comrades, because actually I think we need to use this sort of thing a little bit inside the movement. See, for instance, where I come from, there are 3 universities, all of whom laud their green credentials about their frontline environmental research. I think the union branches, UCU, Unison, the GMB, should write to those employers and say, as part of lauding that research, when your workers and your students take action on the 20th, there should be no victimisations. I think if you work in a union local government workplace, your union branch, the officials, should write to every single councillor and say, if workers work out on strike or join protests, there should be no victimisations because this is supposed to be a sustainable workplace. If you work in the NHS, you could approach your employees and say climate change is a health issue, air pollution, water pollution, these are things that affect people. This is an issue for workers. I think we have to be innovative and think through what we can and can't do, as well as all the boring trade union stuff. But I tell you, the one thing that will motivate people more than anything else is getting a climate activist into a union meeting, to a workplace meeting, into a little discussion with your workmates in the pub. Somebody from the Campaign Against Climate Change, somebody from Extinction Rebellion, a climate striker. Actually, this helps make it real to people. And comrades need to start doing this now, really. It's not very long till September, and we've got a little bit of the quiet period over August, so we need to start making this concrete if we're to make it into a movement. Actually, the world is our oyster. We shouldn't limit ourselves by what we may or may not have done in the past, but actually this is a new moment for it.
Yep, so first of all, Patrick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, what I really liked was people, Nielsen making the link between people's jobs and then people's jobs and how they will be affected by climate change. I went to speak at the FBU conference a while ago, I can't remember the date, and people were genuinely worried because firefighting is an issue where climate change and wildfires could literally mean people being at risk of dying in their workplace. This is it's a dangerous job being made more dangerous by the effects of climate change, and I think that's really important that actually we understand that these are going to affect the way people work. Like the NHS is going to be affected by climate change, like you said. Education is going to be affected by climate change. If in London, children are being born with smaller lungs if you live in central London. But they're growing up and statistically they have smaller lungs than the rest of the country because of the amounts of air pollution. It is an effect that will have an effect on everybody's life. What the comrade said about the role of the police during Rebellion Week, I just wanted to make a comment as I wonder if the general race of the people involved, like she said, but also would the state be able to survive something so serious, like it was in the midst of Brexit, the Tories are the most unpopular they've been in a very long time. I don't think it was an accident that they were not challenged with violence by the police. It's because if they were seen, and especially with the police force that's been cut so heavily under the Tories, good thing or a bad thing, we can talk about that, but I genuinely don't think that they could have done, and I think we have the power to, and that empowers us in a way that other movements have not been able to, the fact that we are facing a weaker police force and a weaker government. But yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. And Polly, if you want to go.
Yeah, so it's great to see everyone so enthusiastic. It's really amazing how quickly these changes have come about and how quickly climate change as an issue has come to the forefront of debate. Is amazing, honestly. Yeah, I wouldn't have imagined that this was going to happen if you'd asked me like a year ago. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's great. And yeah, all the different ideas, all the different things that we can be doing, like kids walking out of school, primary school kids with their teachers. I think that's great. That would be amazing. I think as many different things that we want to have some things that we're doing all together, like the general strike, but as well, if we can have all sorts of different things going on, because I think that's also really important that we show that, yeah, everyone's going to be affected by climate change, by climate and ecological breakdown. So to show that there are everyone has different ways of showing that like coming out against it, and different movements and different ideas. I think that's great. I think we should maintain all the different diversity and all the different actions that people are taking. And the idea that the 20th is just the beginning. Of course, that is just the beginning of making our movement wider and incorporating all different people, and it's just so exciting for this to be happening. And someone else said about engaging in conversation. I think that's important because we've raised the political consciousness, which is obviously really good. But like just kind of normalizing talking about even the language. So climate change or climate and ecological breakdown. Even changing the language that we use and normalizing talking about it with our friends or workmates is really important. And that's also something because it can be easy to feel a bit. It's daunting, it's a big crisis, it can be easy to feel a bit hopeless, but if you're just talking about it with people, it really does make a big difference. And the thing about the police, I think that's a really difficult issue. Patrick talked a bit about it, especially with Extinction Rebellion, but obviously at Extinction Rebellion, we're decentralised, so we have different groups all over the country, so I think it's something that we do need to engage in a conversation about, and I don't have that answer, but it's something that we really do need to talk about, and I agree that it's an important issue, especially as our movement grows and with the urgency that we have, and I think it is definitely something we need to talk about a lot. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to finish with 3 quick points, really. 2 general points and then something about the 20th of September. Someone raised a question about scientific advances and technological innovations to solve the climate crisis. We have to point out that this is a totally false solution. The idea of an energy mix is no kind of solution. The idea that just by getting a few more renewable sources, while continuing to extract fossil fuels, continuing to extract the fossil capital that already exists, will provide no kind of solution to the climate crisis. And it gives you a sense, it gives you an insight into the insanity or the insane logic of capitalism, that the bosses rely on technical innovations that don't yet exist to stop climate change rather than changing the system itself. There's fantasy solutions in the future of people like Elon Musk dreaming stuff up is given as a more realistic option rather than changing the way that society exists in the first place, or exists as it does now. Just on the question of the police, I think people are right to point out that the police were probably quite taken by surprise when the XR protests kicked off. But they have changed their tone, haven't they? They've threatened to charge all of the activists, and if it happens again, or when it does happen again, people are right to point out that they will take a much harder stance. And you see, I think I agree with all the critiques that people have raised about the attitude of some people in XR towards the police. What I disagree with, though, is some of the sneering that has gone on the sidelines from some people, not in this room, people writing articles and so on, denouncing XR because of their position on the police. I agree with the criticisms, but it's a living, breathing movement. People have to be part of it. People have to be part of those discussions. The views of the people at the top of XR are often very different to the XR activists on the ground. Groups like Bristol have 200 people meeting at them every week. The idea that those 200 people share Roger Hallam's views on the police, I think, is ridiculous. There's a living, breathing movement that we have to be part of. Final point, just about what happens on September the 20th, because Suzanne is absolutely right about the importance of the TUC motion. I think our starting point has to be to recognise how much things have shifted in terms of the role that trade unions can play. Me and Suzanne were at a planning meeting last week. that was hosted by the UK Student Climate Network, the School Strikers, Greenpeace were there, and all the sort of NGO groups that have been around the climate movement for years now. And apart from the students, every group in that room were the same kind of people who have been around the Paris demonstrations that went on 4 years ago. In the past, when someone like Suzanne would talk about trade unions in those meetings, people would kind of say, yeah, yeah, and they'd put them at the back of the march. They put the trade union book at the back of the march and not really give it much attention. Now, when Suzanne goes into that meeting and talks about trade unions, everyone goes, yeah, that's brilliant, and all the students love it. You know, talking about trade unions isn't something that's just left to the end. It's the first thing that is discussed at the meeting. People are excited about going to the workplace and going to speak in union meetings. We have to recognise how much that has shifted. So the TUC motion is very important. It gives everybody, if TUC conference, I think, is 2 weeks before the strike. If a motion is passed at that conference, that the TUC supports a 30-minute work stoppage, think of the impact that could have in every trade union branch. Just say, right, it's on, it's happening. Think of the energy that could give. Also, though, Suzanne's right, it works two ways. It gives us a tool, but also we have to put pressure back up to the TUC. We have to put pressure on them to pass it. We have to say, why isn't it, you know, good luck to the people getting up in that conference arguing against that motion. How will they justify that? Good luck to them arguing against a 30-minute stoppage to save the planet. So I think it's crucial as well that while we do the trade union stuff, it has to have the energy of the students in it. We should see it as bringing the energy of the students into the workplaces. The Campaign Against Climate Change has begun to organise a series of meetings around the country, jointly hosted with the UK Student Climate Network, about September the 20th. That's a starting point in your local area about what can happen. Final point in all of this. In all the trade union work we do, and the school strikes and so on, it's incredibly important that we do not lose the question of politics. That we do not lose the fact that the central question around climate change is a political one that demands a revolutionary solution. When Emma talked about the XR slogan of being beyond politics, when politics is what is happening in Westminster, who can blame someone for wanting to be beyond that? When politics is about the Brexit impasse, the manoeuvrings at the top of society, who can blame XR for wanting to be beyond that? We have to be confident, and we have to take great strength from the fact that the most popular slogan on the climate protest is system change, not climate change. It's something that's come from the protest itself, and we have to think about what that means. That means we have to go into the movement confidently, putting forward revolutionary solutions. And there's that old saying, isn't there? What Rosa Luxemburg said about socialism or barbarism. Climate change sums it up perfectly. Because, you see, capitalist society will not just disintegrate because of climate change. It won't just disappear, it won't just fall away. If anything, it will sharpen. The ruling class, faced with that crisis, will sharpen their class rule. They will sharpen the forces that they use to dominate the majority in favour of the minority. Our answer has to be that the solution to the climate crisis lies in saying system change, not climate change, and that starts with the 20th September. It's the start of a process, but that quite crucially, it needs all of us from this room to take ourselves seriously as activists in the climate movement. It means reading the books, reading up on the theory that, by the way, the SWP has been writing about for years, but also it means about building a socialist organisation that can take those arguments into the movement. Thank you.